Professor Baum will now hear from Mr. Thank you.
I think you should put the stop thing over there because we can't see it from over there. It's just an observation, but I think if I look over there, I got 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Okay, well, this has been very interesting so far. I agree with the rabbi here that in order for peace to be possible, there has to be an acceptance of the other. I think that's obvious. The way I understood at least part of what we're talking about today is talking about what are the obstacles to peace. The main obstacle to peace, the way I see it, is the ongoing ethnic cleansing of Palestine by Israel. I think it is the most obvious and the most and the biggest obstacle to peace today. But not only today. As I'm sure you recall, in November of 1947, the United Nations passed a resolution to partition Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. Within 12 months of that resolution, the Jewish forces had taken the country completely, destroyed 500 towns and villages, churches and mosques included, hospitals and schools included, and exiled some 800,000 civilians. Now take into consideration that these people had never had an army or any type of serious military force. By December 1948, in other words, a year later, the United Nations passed a resolution calling for Israel to allow the refugees to return to their homes. Instead, Israel built towns and schools and farms and highways for Jews only on that Palestinian land. And on a personal note, I'll tell you a little story. My mother lived in Jerusalem. And during that time, my older brother was born, and my father was in the Palmach and Haganah. He was fighting. And when the Palestinian communities were exiled from West Jerusalem, their beautiful homes that still exist there were offered to Israeli families, and she was offered one of those homes. She told me this story many, many times. She's 85 today. And when she was offered one of those homes, she refused. She said, I could not bring myself to take the home of the family, knowing this family now lives in a refugee camp. She said, can you imagine how this mother must feel and how much she must miss her home? Furthermore, Israel continued to pass the law of absentees, which allowed the state to take over the land of the Palestinians that were exiled and then prevented them from ever returning and reclaiming their land. So for 60 years, or for over 60 years, Israel has continued this campaign of ethnic cleansing. It did not stop in 1948. And it does this through several vehicles, very effective vehicles. The first one being an education system that teaches Israeli children that Palestinians do not exist and have no rights. Palestinians described in Israeli school books and Israeli textbooks as either a threat or practically non-existent. If you look at Israeli textbooks, if you look at the maps, for example, the maps contain the entire land of Israel from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. There is no mention of Palestinians. And there's a book that just came out, by the way, by an Israeli professor talking about the racism in Israeli textbooks and how Palestinians are portrayed there. Then, of course, there's the military arm. Israelis at 18 go to the military, as many of us have and you heard. And Israel has dedicated forces, dedicated billions of dollars, dedicated technology, all to continue decimating the civilian population of Palestine, which, as I said, has never owned a ship, has never owned a tank, has never owned a war plane, but still it continues. An interesting note here, we heard about the existential threat, I believe twice. In 1967, when the Six-Day War broke out, my father was on the general staff. He was one of the generals on the general staff, and in preparation for my book, I went to the Israeli Army archives to read what the generals discussed. What did they talk about as they were preparing for war? And if you know a little bit about the history, the generals were pushing for war. The Israeli cabinet was a little more hesitant. And if you look at the conversation the generals had, their claim was the Arabs are not prepared for war. The Egyptian army is not prepared for war, and therefore we must decimate them now. This was the conversation. They created the myth of an existential threat to justify the conquests after the fact. And many of the generals, including Ariel Sharon, who was probably the most right-wing prime minister Israel has ever had, admitted to that. There was no existential threat. The existential threat was invented by the generals to justify the conquest. And of course, once they decimated the Egyptian army, there was no really any other threat. The Syrian and the Jordanian armies never posed a threat, and Israel took the West Bank and the Golan Heights, two areas that Israel had always wanted. The Israeli army had always wanted to take the West Bank so that Israel's eastern boundary would be the Jordan River. So this is something I think it's important for Jewish people to realize and to understand. And again, this is not something I invented. This is in the transcripts. Israel continues and has done since its very inception to go in and bomb and attack civilian Palestinian civilian populations all around it, whether it's in Jordan or in the Gaza Strip or in the West Bank. And of course, I think probably the worst case was in December of 2008 in Gaza, where for 21 days Israel conducted probably the most vicious attack on a civilian population that we can remember since World War II. On the first day of the attack, on December 27, 2008, Israel began with a bombardment of Gaza of 100 tons of bombs. Gaza is one of the most populated areas in the world. 800,000 children live in Gaza. Gaza has never had a tank, has never had a warplane, has never had an army. This, I think, is probably the most shameful day in the Jewish history. As Jews around the world and others around the world justify this, and we talk about Jewish values, our Jewish values tell us that even if the devil lived there, as long as one child lived there, the city should have been spared. These people still justify this. And then, of course, the bureaucracy. There's an entire bureaucracy in Israel which is dedicated to making sure that life for Palestinians is unlivable. And as Israeli attorney Michael Tzfart says, he calls it walls, mountains of walls and oceans of restrictions under which the Palestinians have to live. The problem, of course, is not the Jewish state. The notion of a Jewish state might be a good idea. The problem is having a Jewish state in a land that is half of the population, or half the population are not Jewish. Today there are about 6 million Israelis and about 5.5 or so million Palestinians living between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, a region that is completely controlled by Israel. So Israel has actually created the one state. People talk one state, two states. Israel already created a one state and eliminated the possibility, by design, of ever creating a Palestinian state in the West Bank. And this was done by design so that the conquests of the West Bank would be irreversible. And if anybody has any doubts, listen and read what Israeli prime ministers have been saying over the last 40 years. So we have three populations. We've got the population of the Israeli Jews, who live in a pretty much democratic society. We've got the Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, who are third-class citizens. I believe there are over 20 laws in the Israeli law books that discriminate against the Palestinian citizens of the State of Israel. And of course, we have the Palestinians who live in the West Bank and Gaza, as we've heard, that have no rights at all. They live under a completely brutal military government. They have no recourse. Israel keeps saying that it will allow the Palestinians some form of autonomy on a particular part of the land that Israel will determine at a time that Israel will determine and under conditions that will be determined by Israel. The notion of the two sides recognizing each other, of Israel recognizing the Palestinian rights and sitting with the Palestinians as equals, is completely foreign to the Zionist way of thinking. It has never happened. Israel has never allowed it to happen. And I think it's important to realize we have Jewish values and we have Zionist values, and they shouldn't be mixed. They should not be confused. Zionist values allow the dropping of 100 tons of bombs on a civilian population with 800,000 children. Zionist values allow that. Jewish values reprehend that, abhor that. And I think that has to be made clear. I think it's important, moving forward, to divorce the state, to divorce the institution of state from the identity of the people. It's not, we don't need a Jewish state. We don't need an Arab state. We can't have a Jewish state or an Arab state where the population is divided half and half as it is today. What we need is a state that allows the Palestinians and the Israelis to build a future on their shared homeland. Thank you very much.